They said it was an honor, but no one survives an honor like this. The hall stretched nearly 200 feet long, a cathedral of polished metal and cold white light that hummed faintly through the soles of Ethan Cole's boots, each step echoing louder than it should, like the place wanted him to feel small, like it was measuring him and already finding him lacking. He adjusted the collar of his borrowed suit, fabric too stiff, too clean, nothing like the grease-stained work gear he was used to. And for a moment, he wondered if this was all a mistake, if someone somewhere would finally notice he didn't belong here. But no one stopped him, no one even looked at him, because to them he wasn't worth looking at. At the far end of the chamber, beneath a suspended ring of hovering light that cast a soft blue glow across the floor, she waited. Liara stood motionless, her posture perfect but empty, like a statue someone had forgotten to finish. Her skin a muted shade of blue that caught the light in strange, almost liquid ways, and her eyes, those eyes, were open but distant, reflecting nothing, not the guards, not the crowd, not even him. The official spoke in low, measured tones, words passing through translation implants in his ear, phrases like union confirmed and genetic redundancy waived, drifting past without meaning. Because none of it sounded like a wedding. Not really. It sounded like paperwork being finalized on something already decided. Ethan swallowed, the air dry and too cold, his breath visible for a split second as he stepped into position beside her, close enough now to notice the faint tremor in her fingers, so slight no one else would see it. But he did, because he was used to noticing small things, the kind that kept machines running and people alive. A thin band of light wrapped around their wrists, not touching skin, just hovering, pulsing once like it was thinking, then settling into a steady glow, and the chamber fell quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, someone announced. Completion, voices shifted, footsteps turned away, already done with them, already moving on, as if the moment didn't matter at all. Ethan glanced at her, really looked this time, at the way her shoulders were held just a fraction too tight, at the way her breathing didn't quite match the calm they expected from her, and something about it didn't sit right, because broken things usually sag, they collapse, they don't hold themselves together like this. He hesitated, just a second, aware of cameras, of watching eyes, of expectations he didn't understand, and then he did something small, something almost invisible. He stepped half an inch back, giving her space, not claiming it, not claiming her. Her eyes flickered, just once, like a system coming online, and for the first time, they focused, not on the officials, not on the guards, but on him, sharp and searching, as if she was seeing something unexpected, something that didn't fit. The light around their wrists pulsed again, slightly brighter this time, unnoticed by everyone else, and somewhere deep in the structure. A system recalibrated. Ethan didn't know it yet, but in a hall, built to confirm obedience, he had just introduced something far more dangerous, a choice. The transport vessel was smaller than Ethan expected, barely 60 feet from nose to tail, its interior lined with matte gray panels that absorbed sound instead of echoing it, creating a silence that felt intentional, controlled. The hatch sealed behind them with a soft hydraulic hiss, and the outside world, the officials, the ceremony, the watching eyes, vanished as if it had never existed, leaving only the low hum of the ship's life support system and the faint vibration of engines warming. Beneath the floor, Ethan exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders once, trying to shake off the weight of a situation he still did not fully understand, then glanced across the narrow cabin where Liara sat on a fixed bench, hands resting in her lap exactly where they had been placed, posture still perfect, still too perfect, like she had been arranged rather than choosing to sit. The blue ambient light along the ceiling traced the contours of her face, catching subtle shifts in expression that most would miss, a slight tightening near the eyes, a controlled breath that came half a second too late. He moved. Carefully, not too close, lowering himself onto the opposite bench with deliberate space between them, boots planted flat on the deck, hands open on his knees, the way he had learned to sit around volatile equipment, giving it room, respecting what it might do. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching until it felt almost solid, and then her voice broke it, quiet but clear. perfectly translated through the implant at the base of his skull. You are not behaving correctly. Ethan let out a small breath that almost became a laugh, shaking his head once as he leaned back slightly against the cold metal behind him. Yeah, I have been told that before, he said, his tone even, not mocking, not defensive, just honest. Her eyes shifted toward him, fully now, no longer distant, studying him with a focus that felt less like curiosity and more like calculation. You did not initiate a claim, she continued, each word precise, as if chosen from a list of acceptable outcomes. You did not assert dominance or ownership. That is the expected sequence. Ethan rubbed a hand along the back of his neck, feeling the faint stubble there, grounding himself in something familiar before answering. I am not interested in sequences, he said, meeting her gaze without forcing it, without challenging it. And you are not something I own. The words hung between them. Simple, almost too simple, but the effect was immediate. Her fingers moved, just slightly, not the tremor from before, but a controlled adjustment, like a system recalibrating. That response is statistically insignificant, she said after a moment, though her voice had lost a fraction of its earlier certainty. Ethan shrugged lightly, glancing toward the narrow viewport where distant stars stretched into thin lines as the ship entered faster than light travel. The shift almost imperceptible except for the subtle change in pressure against his chest. Then your statistics need an update, he replied. Another pause followed, but this one felt different, less empty, more like something forming. Liara's gaze lingered on him longer than before, tracing his posture, his distance, the absence of any attempt to control or direct her, and for the first time, her shoulders lowered by a fraction of an inch. The overhead lights dimmed automatically as the ship settled into cruise mode, casting the cabin in softer shadows. And in that quiet, controlled space, something unseen shifted, not in the ship, not in the systems, but in the space between them, where expectation had been replaced by something neither of them had a name for yet. The ship settled into its long-range glide with a barely audible shift, like a breath held and then released, and the stars outside the viewport stretched into pale ribbons of light that never quite blurred, just elongated, as if time itself had thinned. Ethan watched them for a moment, then looked back at Liara, noticing the difference immediately, subtle but undeniable, her posture no longer perfectly fixed, her shoulders no longer locked into that artificial symmetry, one hand now resting slightly off-center as if she had moved it without permission. Does it always feel like this? He asked quietly, nodding toward the window, his voice low enough to match the stillness of the cabin. Her eyes followed his gesture, tracking the distant glow, and for a second she did not answer, as if the question itself required processing beyond language. Transit efficiency is within acceptable parameters, she said at first, the formal tone returning like a reflex, but then she paused, and something shifted again. It is different than before. Ethan tilted his head slightly, a faint smile touching one corner of his mouth, not amused, just recognizing the change. Different how? He asked. Liara's gaze lingered on the stars, her pupils adjusting in slow, deliberate increments, taking in more light than a human eye could manage, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, less certain. There is no directive attached to the observation, she said, as if that alone made the experience unfamiliar. Ethan leaned back a little, exhaling softly, the metal behind him cool through his shirt. Yeah, he said. That is called just looking. The word seemed to catch her attention more than the explanation, her eyes shifting back to him, searching his face as if trying to locate the meaning there instead of in her internal systems. Just looking, she repeated, slower this time, testing the shape of it. Another silence followed, but it no longer felt empty. It felt open. The ship's internal lighting dimmed further as it adjusted to a lower power cycle, casting long, soft shadows across the cabin, and Ethan noticed the faint reflection of those lights along her skin. The way it shimmered not like metal, not like glass, but something in between, something alive. He shifted forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, keeping his movements deliberate, visible. You do not have to sit like that, he said after a moment, nodding toward her rigid posture. No one here is grading you. Liara's brow moved, just a fraction, the smallest crease forming as she processed the statement. "There is always evaluation," she replied automatically. But the words lacked their earlier certainty. Ethan shook his head once, slow and calm. "Not from me," he said. That landed differently. He could see it in the way her breathing changed. A fraction deeper, a fraction slower. Like something inside her had been given permission to take up space. Her hand shifted again, more noticeably this time. Fingers curling slightly against the fabric beneath her, not from tension, but from choice. "Your behavior introduces variables that are not accounted for," she said, though her voice now carried something new beneath it, something almost like curiosity. Ethan gave a small shrug, glancing once more at the endless stretch of light outside. "Good," he said. "Means we are not running the same script." The word script lingered in the air between them, and Liara's gaze followed it, as if tracing something invisible, something she had always been inside without realizing it. For a long moment, she said nothing, and then, very quietly, almost to herself, she asked, "If there is no script, what determines the next action?" Ethan did not answer right away, letting the question exist on its own, letting it breathe the way he had let the silence breathe before. Then he looked at her, steady and unforced, and said, "You do." The question stayed in the air long after he said it, quiet but heavy, and Ethan could almost hear the ship's systems adjusting around it. Like even the walls were not used to that kind of answer. Liara did not move right away, her eyes fixed on him with a focus that was no longer distant, no longer empty, but searching, as if she was trying to locate the boundary of something she had never been allowed to touch before. "Choice," she said finally, the word slower than anything she had spoken before, each syllable deliberate, "is not an efficient system." Ethan let out a soft breath, nodding once as if he expected that answer, his gaze drifting briefly to the faint pulse of light running along the ceiling panels, tracking the rhythm of the ship's core. "No," he said, "it is not supposed to be." That seemed to disrupt something deeper, not just her reasoning but the structure behind it, because her posture shifted again, more noticeably this time, her back no longer perfectly aligned, her shoulders lowering in a way that suggested release rather than correction. Her hand moved across the surface beside her, fingers brushing the material like she was testing it, feeling it instead of just registering it. "If I determine the next action," she said, her voice quieter now, less certain, "then the outcome becomes unpredictable." Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, keeping his tone steady. "Grounded?" "Yeah," he replied. "That is kind of the point." Her gaze dropped to her own hands, watching them as if they belonged to someone else, as if she had just been given control of something she had only ever observed. For a moment, the only sound was the low, constant hum of the ship, a vibration that traveled through the metal and into bone, steady and real. Then, slowly, Liara shifted her position, not by command, not by instruction, but by choice, turning slightly toward the viewport, angling her body so she could see the stretched lines of Starlight more directly. The movement was small, almost insignificant, but Ethan felt it like a system coming online, not forced, not triggered, but initiated. "There is no directive to observe this," she said, her eyes following the distant light. "And yet I continue to do so." Ethan watched her for a second, then nodded once. "That means you want to," he said simply. The word "want" seemed to settle differently than anything else, not like a command, not like a variable, but like something that did not need justification. Liara's breathing shifted again, deeper now, less controlled, as if she was no longer matching a preset rhythm but finding her own. Her fingers pressed lightly against the surface beneath her, feeling the texture, the temperature, the reality of it. "If I continue," she said, almost as if she was thinking out loud, "then I am deviating from all recorded patterns." Ethan gave a small, almost invisible smile, the kind that did not need to be seen to exist. "Then maybe the patterns were wrong," he said. Another silence followed, but it carried weight now, meaning, the kind that builds instead of empties. Somewhere in the ship, a soft tone chimed, barely audible, a system notification that did not demand attention but marked a change, a recalibration. Liara's head tilted slightly, as if she registered it. but did not immediately respond, which in itself was a deviation. External systems are adjusting, she noted, though her voice lacked urgency. Ethan did not look away from her. Let them, he said. For a long moment, she did nothing. No immediate reaction, no correction, just presence. And then, slowly, she turned her head back toward him, her eyes no longer searching for instructions, but holding something new, something that had not been there before. If I choose incorrectly, she said, softer now, almost human in its uncertainty, there will be consequences. Ethan held her gaze, steady and calm, not dismissing the weight of it, but not letting it define her either. There are always consequences, he said, but at least they will be yours. The words settled between them, and this time, Liara did not immediately respond, because for the first time, she was not looking for the correct answer. She was considering her own. The hum of the ship deepened, not louder but fuller, like something beneath the surface had shifted into a new rhythm, and Ethan felt it through the soles of his boots, a steady pulse that did not belong to any system he recognized. Liara seemed to feel it too, her head tilting slightly, not in reaction, but in awareness, her attention splitting between the physical space and something unseen, something layered beneath it. There is a variance, she said quietly, her eyes unfocused for a moment as if tracking data no one else could perceive. Systems are recalibrating without directive. Ethan leaned back again, crossing one ankle over the other, his posture loose but attentive, like a mechanic listening to an engine he trusted more than the readout. Maybe they are responding, he said, his voice calm, unforced. Her gaze snapped back to him, sharper now, the gold in her eyes catching the dim light. Responding requires input, she replied, and there was something different in the way she said it, not correction, but inquiry. Ethan gave a small nod, tapping two fingers lightly against his knee in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. Yeah, he said. And you changed something. The idea seemed to land deeper than anything before, not as a concept, but as a realization. Liara looked down at her hands again, turning one slightly, watching the way the light traced along her skin, the subtle shifts in tone and reflection that made her seem less like a constructed figure and more like something alive, something present. I adjusted posture, she said, almost defensively, though the certainty was fading, and redirected visual focus. Ethan smiled faintly, not dismissing her explanation, but not accepting it as complete either. You chose to, he said. That word again, choice, and this time it did not meet resistance. It lingered, settled, expanded. Liara's fingers curled slightly, pressing into the material beneath her as if grounding herself in the physical sensation, anchoring to something real instead of abstract. If that is true, she said slowly, then the system response is linked to my decision, not to external command. Ethan nodded once, a small, affirming motion. That is usually how it works where I come from, he said. She studied him again, but now there was less distance in it, less analysis for the sake of classification, and more curiosity, genuine and unstructured. Your world operates without centralized directive? She asked. Ethan let out a quiet breath that almost became a laugh, shaking his head slightly. Not exactly, he said. But the parts that matter most, they are not controlled like that. Her gaze lingered on him, searching for the boundary of what he meant, and for a moment, the ship's ambient systems dimmed again, the lighting shifting to a softer blue that cast longer shadows. Across the cabin, there is no protocol for this interaction, Liara said, but the statement no longer sounded like a limitation, it sounded like an observation. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees again, meeting her eyes without pressure. Then we get to make one, he said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged, not with tension, but with possibility. Liara inhaled slowly, the movement visible now, no longer hidden behind perfect control, and then, with deliberate intent, she shifted again, this time moving closer, not by much, maybe a few inches across the bench, but enough to close the distance she had maintained since the beginning. It was a small movement, almost nothing by most standards, but in that moment, it felt like a threshold. If I continue to choose, she said, her voice quieter, more grounded, then I am no longer operating within design parameters. Ethan held her gaze, steady and unafraid of the implication. Then you are operating as yourself, he replied. Her eyes flickered, not with confusion this time, but with something deeper, something forming. And somewhere beneath them, the ship adjusted again, systems shifting, not because they were told to, but because something new had begun to exist inside them. The ship did not announce the change, but Ethan felt it before any system confirmed it, a subtle shift in gravity distribution, a recalibration that pressed differently against his chest, like the vessel itself had decided to pay attention. Liara felt it too, her spine straightening not from habit this time, but from awareness, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she was listening to something deeper than sound. Trajectory deviation, she said under her breath, though no alert followed, no warning tone, nothing that matched the significance of the words. Ethan frowned slightly, pushing himself up from the bench and taking a slow step toward the narrow control panel along the wall, its surface dark except for a faint pulse of standby light. That does not sound like a normal adjustment, he said, glancing back at her. Liara did not immediately respond, her gaze distant again, but not empty this time, focused inward, tracking layers of information beyond visible systems. There is no external command authorizing the change, she said, quieter now, as if the realization itself carried weight, and no internal directive initiating it. Ethan exhaled slowly, resting a hand against the panel without activating it, feeling the faint vibration beneath his palm. So something changed without being told to, he said. Her eyes shifted back to him, sharper than before, the gold in them catching the dim blue light. Yes, she replied, and this time there was no hesitation, no attempt to reframe it. Ethan let that sit for a second, then nodded once, almost to himself. That is exactly what you did, he said. The connection landed immediately, visible in the way her expression altered, not dramatically, but enough to register, a microsecond pause in her breathing, a slight widening of her eyes. You are suggesting correlation, she said, though her tone lacked the earlier certainty that would have dismissed it outright. Ethan pushed off the panel and took a step back toward her, stopping at a respectful distance, keeping his movements slow, predictable. I am suggesting you are not the only thing on this ship that can respond without orders, he said. Liara's gaze flickered toward the ceiling, tracking the faint lines of light that now pulsed at an irregular interval, not the steady rhythm from before, but something more organic, less precise. That is not possible, she said, automatically, but the words sounded weaker now, less like truth and more like habit. Ethan gave a small shrug, folding his arms loosely across his chest. A lot of things are not supposed to be possible. Until they happen, he replied. Silence followed, but it carried tension now, not fear, but anticipation, like the moment before a system either stabilizes or transforms. Liara slowly stood, the movement fluid but deliberate, not commanded, not triggered, but chosen, and as she did, the ship responded again, the floor beneath them adjusting by a fraction of an inch, compensating for balance that should not have mattered at all. She noticed it immediately, her eyes widening just slightly as she looked down, then back at him. It is adapting, she said, her voice softer now, almost disbelieving. Ethan nodded once, watching her carefully. Or listening, he said. That word settled differently, deeper than the others, and Liara's posture shifted again, no longer held in perfect alignment, but grounded, real, present. If the system is responding to unstructured input, she said slowly, thinking through each word, then it is no longer operating within its original design parameters. Ethan met her gaze, steady as ever. Neither are you, he said. The connection between the two ideas hung there, undeniable now. And for the first time since the ship had launched, Liara did not try to resolve it, did not try to correct it. She simply stood there, feeling it, existing inside it. Outside the viewport, the stretched lines of Starlight flickered for just a fraction of a second, not a failure, not a glitch, but a shift, as if something far beyond the ship had noticed the change as well, and somewhere in the distance, something began to move in response. The stars outside the viewport did not stretch anymore. They slowed, one by one, collapsing back into points of light, as if something had reached out and pressed pause on motion itself. And Ethan felt the change before any system acknowledged it. A subtle pull in his chest, like the ship had exhaled and forgotten how to inhale again. Liara stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed forward, not on the stars, not on the ship, but beyond them, as if she was looking through layers no human instrument could measure. "We are no longer in transit," she said, her voice low but steady. And this time there was no system confirmation, no display lighting up to agree with her. Yet Ethan knew she was right. He stepped closer to the viewport, narrowing his eyes at the darkness ahead, noticing something that should not exist, a distortion in the distance, not visible in shape, but in absence, a place where light bent too smoothly, where space looked attentive. "That is not a destination on any chart," he muttered. Liara did not respond immediately, her breathing slow, deliberate, like she was aligning with something external, instead of internal. "It is not a location," she said after a moment. "It is a response." Ethan turned his head slightly toward her, not fully breaking his focus on the anomaly, but enough to register the weight of her words. "To what?" he asked. Her eyes shifted then, finally leaving the unseen point beyond the ship and returning to him. And there was no emptiness left in them now, no distant calculation, only clarity, sharp and undeniable. "To deviation," she said. The words settled into the air with a gravity that the ship itself seemed to recognize, because beneath them, the structure adjusted again, not mechanically, but deliberately. The lights dimmed further, casting the cabin into a deeper blue. And for the first time since launch, a tone sounded through the ship, soft but unmistakable, not an alarm, not a warning, but an acknowledgement. Ethan straightened slightly, instinct pulling him into awareness, not fear, just readiness. "That does not sound like something built into the system," he said quietly. Liara took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them without hesitation this time. Her presence no longer confined, no longer contained. "It is not," she replied. The viewport flickered then, not with failure, but with transition, and the darkness beyond it shifted, forming patterns that did not hold shape long enough to define, like something was trying to be seen but had not decided how. Ethan felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, not pain, just awareness, like his perception was being gently stretched. "Tell me that is normal where you come from," he said, his voice low. Liara's gaze remained fixed on the shifting void, her expression calm, almost familiar. "It is not normal anywhere," she said. "Until it happens." The echo of his own words did not feel like coincidence. It felt like alignment. Another tone sounded, slightly higher this time, and a faint line of light traced itself along the floor between them, extending toward the viewport, stopping just short of the glass. Liara looked down at it, then back at Ethan, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "This is the point of consequence," she said softly, not as a warning, but as a statement. Ethan followed the line of light with his eyes, then looked back at her, steady, grounded. "Then we see it through," he replied. She held his gaze for a second longer, and something passed between them, not spoken, not defined, but understood. Then, without waiting for instruction, without checking for permission, Liara stepped forward, crossing the line. The moment her foot touched the illuminated path, the space beyond the viewport shifted again, faster now, clearer, and Ethan realized with a quiet certainty that whatever had been waiting out there had just decided to reveal itself. The moment her foot crossed the line, the ship did not move, yet everything changed. The light beneath Liara's step did not glow brighter. It deepened, as if gaining weight, as if the space itself had acknowledged her presence and adjusted to it. Ethan felt it in his lungs, a subtle resistance, like the air had thickened just enough to be noticed, and for the first time since this began, he did not try to understand it. He just stayed where he was, watching her. Beyond the viewport, the shifting darkness resolved, not into a shape, not into a structure, but into layers, vast and silent, like overlapping horizons that did not belong to distance but to awareness, each one folding over the next with a slow, deliberate precision. Liara did not hesitate, her posture steady, her breathing calm, not controlled anymore, but aligned, as if she had found a rhythm that matched whatever waited beyond. "It is observing," she said, her voice soft, not afraid, not uncertain, simply present. Ethan took a slow step forward, stopping just short of the light, not because he was afraid to cross it, but because he understood, instinctively, that this moment was hers. "Does it know you?" he asked quietly. Liara did not look back at him this time, her gaze fixed on the layered void, her eyes reflecting something that was not light, something deeper, something that seemed to move inside the reflection instead of across it. "It does not know me," she said. "It is recognizing." The difference settled heavily in the space between them, and Ethan felt it without needing it explained. The ship responded again, not with sound, but with structure, the walls shifting by a fraction, the ceiling panels dimming further until the only clear illumination came from the path beneath her and the distant, impossible horizon beyond. Liara lifted her hand slowly, not reaching out, not commanding, just existing in the moment, and as she did, the layers beyond the viewport aligned, not perfectly, but enough to suggest intention, like something vast had adjusted its focus. "This was never about compliance," she said, her voice quieter now, but stronger, grounded in something that no longer needed validation. Ethan watched her, the way she stood without hesitation, without waiting, and for the first time, he saw it clearly, not as a guess, not as a theory, but as truth. She had never been broken. "Then what was it about?" he asked, his voice steady, matching hers. Liara's eyes shifted then, not fully turning, but enough to acknowledge him, and there was something in that glance that carried weight, history, and choice all at once. "Discernment," she said. The word echoed, not through the ship, but through something deeper, something that did not need sound to travel. The light beneath her expanded slightly, just a few inches, enough to blur the boundary between where she stood and where Ethan waited. The invitation was not spoken, not signaled, but it was there. Ethan looked at the edge of the light, then back at her, and for a brief second, he considered stepping forward, closing the distance completely, but he did not yet, because he understood now that this was not about following, it was about choosing. "And what did it find?" he asked instead. Liara turned fully then, facing him, her expression no longer distant, no longer constructed, but entirely her own, and in her eyes, there was no emptiness left, only clarity, steady and undeniable. "That power without recognition is incomplete," she said, and as the words settled, the space beyond the viewport shifted one final time, the layers aligning into something vast and silent, something that did not bow, did not command, but acknowledged. The ship held still, suspended in that moment, and Ethan realized with a quiet certainty that whatever had been watching, whatever had been waiting, had just made its decision, and it had chosen her. Nothing moved, and yet everything had already changed. The vast presence beyond the viewport did not advance, did not retreat. It simply remained, layered and silent, as if its decision had settled into the fabric of reality itself. The light beneath Liara steadied, no longer expanding, no longer testing, just holding her where she stood, not as a boundary, but as a recognition. Ethan exhaled slowly. The tension he had not realized he carried leaving his chest in a quiet breath, his gaze fixed on her, not on the impossible horizon beyond, because he understood now that the real shift had never been out there. It had always been here. Liara did not step back, did not lower her gaze. She simply stood, present and grounded, her shoulders no longer held by expectation, her posture no longer shaped by design, but by choice. The faint blue light traced along her skin, no longer cold, no longer distant, but alive, reflecting something deeper than the ship's systems could generate. "It has concluded," she said softly, not as a report, not as data, but as awareness. Ethan nodded once, slow and steady, his hands relaxed at his sides. "Yeah," he replied. "I figured." The ship responded one final time, not with a shift, not with a recalibration, but with stillness, a complete and absolute alignment, as if every system had found its resting state. The layered horizon beyond the viewport began to soften, not disappearing, not collapsing, but withdrawing its focus like something vast, choosing to observe from a distance instead of directly. Liara's eyes followed it for a moment, then returned to Ethan, and this time, there was no search in her gaze, no calculation, only clarity, and something else, something quieter, but stronger, understanding. I was never meant to obey, she said, her voice calm, steady, certain in a way it had never been before. I was meant to be evaluated. Ethan gave a small, almost invisible smile, the kind that carried no triumph, only recognition. And you passed, he said. She held his gaze for a second longer, then shook her head, just slightly. No, she replied. I chose. The distinction settled deeper than any conclusion, because it did not belong to the system, it belonged to her. The light beneath her dimmed gradually, not fading, but integrating back into the ship, no longer separate, no longer marking a threshold, because the threshold itself had been crossed. Ethan stepped forward then, not hesitating this time, closing the distance between them without urgency, without pressure, simply standing. Beside her, the viewport now showed only stars again, steady and familiar, but they did not feel the same. Nothing did. So what happens now? He asked quietly, not expecting a directive, not expecting an answer shaped by protocol. Liara turned her gaze outward once more, then back to him, and for the first time, there was something almost human in the way she paused, in the way she considered. Now, she said, her voice softer, but unwavering. They will respond, as if the universe itself had been waiting for those words. The ship's long-range sensors activated without command, a faint series of tones rising in sequence, not alarms, but signals, distant, numerous, and converging. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as new points of light appeared beyond the viewport, not stars, but vessels, emerging from the dark one by one, then dozens, then more, forming a silent formation that stretched beyond what he could count. They did not approach aggressively, did not maneuver for position, they simply aligned, each one holding distance, each one facing the same direction. Facing her, Liara did not move, did not react with surprise, because somewhere, she had already known, Ethan stood beside her, still just a man, still nothing special by any measurable standard, but present, steady, real. The first transmission came through without sound, a visual shift in the external displays, a synchronized dimming of lights across every vessel, like a collective breath held and released. Ethan blinked once, slow, taking it in. Is that? He started. Liara's answer was quiet, but absolute. Acknowledgement.